What's happening, people? I am going to talk today about the spotlight effect, and more specifically, I'm going to talk about how we can get round being stopped doing the things we want to do by our anxieties. We find so many circumstances in which there's something we want to do, there's something, be it complimenting a stranger, or walking in a particular manner, or dancing whilst you're on the street, whatever it is. We find ourselves in so many circumstances in which the thing we want to do is not done because we are inhibited by our anxieties. And here on this channel, we're not about that shit. We're trying to work out how we can get through this. So, what I'm going to start with is a bit of schooling. And we're going to talk about what the spotlight effect is. Now, the spotlight effect is essentially the social idea that everyone is watching you at all times and everything you're doing is being watched with microscopic detail. And what this causes is a kind of existential anxiety about everything it is that you do. You will trip over a curb innocuously and no one will even notice that you've done it, and you will think that all the eyes in the world are on you and that everyone saw what you were doing. Or you might not have woken up in time to go to work and your hair's looking a bit funny, a problem I don't have as a gerbil. And you'll think, oh my God, everyone's going to look at my hair, it's going to be terrible, and I'm going to look so stupid, everyone's going to notice. This is the spotlight effect. It is essentially the idea that you think in your head every single person in the world is going to notice the finest of details about you at all times. The problem with the spotlight effect is the amount of anxiety that it induces, and at that, the problem is how much it inhibits you from doing the things that you want to do. Having this constant looming feeling that everyone's watching you and that anything you do is going to have some sort of perspective or judgment attached to it really does, it inhibits you from doing what it is you want to do because you're scared to make a mistake. We are, in society nowadays, kind of innately programmed to be worried about what it is that people think of us. We have a society in which judgment and at that anxiety is rife, and it makes sense that we're going to be living in a time in which we're worried about everything it is that we do and how that will come across to someone else. It is the way of the world nowadays, unfortunately. So, first of all, the baseline that we have to establish here is the ludicrousy of the spotlight effect. The fact that this thing exists does not make it rational nor even true. It's not a logical frame to perceive yourself in. The spotlight effect essentially attaches your beliefs and your ideas and your focus to everyone else in the world. What you're doing when you experience this spotlight effect, though you're not choosing to, is assuming that everyone else in the world has as much impetus and focus on you as you do, which they quite obviously don't, because you do not walk down the street thinking, oh my God, what is that person over there doing? I can't believe they're doing that. And watching their micro movements. You don't do it because you are too focused on you. And it's the exact same thing the other way around. No one is walking down the street putting any more focus on you or someone else than they are themselves. It does not happen. We cancel each other out in this, ironically, because everyone is so focused on themselves and worried about how other people will look at them that no one actually does what it is we're worried about doing. So, establishing the fact that this actually is a very irrational frame to perceive your world in is a good step towards dispelling the illusion that is. With that, and this is something that I find myself doing a lot, is you attach a perspective that has opinions. It's not just having the eyes. It's not you assuming that someone is watching you. It's assuming that someone's watching you and has an opinion of you. It's assuming that, almost invariably, someone is going to have a negative opinion of you. Excuse me. And the problem that we have here is we're trying to effectively read people's minds. essentially attaching a perspective to someone that is the only angle it can come from is your angle. You know nothing about that person. You have no idea how that person perceives you, if they are. And all you're doing is essentially making an assumption that this is the way they're perceiving you. And unfortunately, if you're someone who experiences the spotlight effect, it will be a negative assumption. So, bringing together the fact that, one, people are very unlikely to actually be paying any attention to you because they're so engrossed in themselves, and that's the way that the world is. And two, that what you're thinking they might think is no more than a bold assumption. You have nothing to base it on because you don't know that person. So that's all well and good. That's fine. You know, we can learn the reason as to why it is that we have this thing, and we can learn what it is, but we need to know actually how we can go about circumventing the process and no longer having the proverbial foot on the neck and not being ailed by this anymore. So how do you go about taking the steps that can remove this existential anxiety that looms over you at all times when you're in public? How can you go about doing that? I'll tell you here. The first thing that you need to do is make micro changes to your everyday life, and more specifically to your everyday movements in a social environment. Now, what I mean by that is the standard way of being and the standard way of walking down the street, for example, would be maybe your hands in your pockets, you're just walking down, face no expression, just walking along. Normal. Dispelling this illusion can, what am I trying to say? What you need to do here is change some of the things that you're doing. So even if it's something as simple as just stopping when you're walking and pulling a leaf off of a bush and actually making an effort to stop what you're doing, pull the leaf off the bush as the cars are going past or as people are walking about, whatever, and then carry on. Now, you might be thinking, well, Tom, what difference is this going to make to my anxiety by pulling a fucking leaf off of a bush? Well, I'll tell you. When you do something that is left of field and not quite the normal way of being, you will get that thought process in your head where you think, someone's probably just watched me do that and thought, what is he doing? That thought will occur if you jump up and tap a sign as you walk past, or maybe you walk round to something with a bit more kind of activation or activity than normal. When you do things like that, your head will instantly think, was someone watching me doing that? Was that weird? Your head will do that straight away. And the funny thing is, as I say, you won't understand this necessarily until you do this. Then you'll realise actually your mind does this. What this does is it teaches your mind two things. Number one, it teaches your mind that nothing actually matters when you do these things. No one gets out of the car and goes, oh my God, what fucking weirdo. He's just picked a bush off he just picked a leaf off a bush. No one does that. It doesn't happen. So it teaches your brain, actually, the things that I'm doing here, though they might not be normal, don't mean anything. Nothing has happened to me as a result of this. And that's the kind of the deeply ingrained thing within anxiety, is it is a fear of being harmed. And that harm nowadays takes form in mental harm. It's ridiculing. And when you do something like this, your mind becomes aware and is conditioned that actually there is no harm in these things, and thus it becomes confident to move out of its shell and do these things autonomously. And you do get to a stage where you do these things autonomously, but that's a story for later on. So with this in mind, how are you supposed to go about implementing things to a point in which they make a genuine difference? What I would say, and before I go anywhere, I'm going to say one really good thing to do here is to pick up litter off the floor. And I'm going to tell you why that is a really good thing. The obvious thing is, it is just good to pick up litter. If you see something on the floor and pick it up, you're going to feel good about it. The world's better for it. It's good to do. But that in itself is another thing that people could potentially notice you doing. And that potential kind of spotlighting is going to activate this feeling of, I wonder if people are watching me, which is going to exercise the muscle. It's a bicep curl for your confidence. Let's put it that way. And what you need to do with this is do it on such a consistent basis that it becomes normal. Now, this sort of advice can often be daunting for people. If you say to someone you need to do something all the time, it becomes harrowing and difficult to conceptualize, which is why I want you to start with things that are very, very simple and enough difference to make a difference, but not enough to throw you out and think, oh my God, when I get home, I'm going to sit in a ball and cry and never go anywhere ever again. Just things like picking rubbish up the floor, or taking a leaf off the bush. I was nearly going to say bush again. Tapping a sign, walking in a door in a particular manner, or I don't know, just something, add a little pirouette or something as you turn a corner. Just little things like that are different and add a bit of flavour. That will definitely help this process. I can assure you of that. It's something I've implemented myself, and I'm noticing genuine improvements as a result of. It makes you feel more vibrant as well. It makes you feel better about the world that you find yourself in, because things are just a bit more fun. You're just doing things in a bit more of an interesting way. And the goal here with removing the spotlight effect is essentially to become positively impulsive, let's say. And what I mean by that is, when you have an impulse to do something, be it compliment a stranger as they walk down the street, you see someone with a nice hat on, say, that's a nice hat. Or you're listening to a song and you feel like you just want to click along, or you want to sing maybe. When you have these impulses to do things that you can perceive as a positive thing, but are invariably shot down in flames by your anxiety that says, don't do that, you're going to stand out. Learning to reduce the friction between the anxiety and you doing the thing is key here. And that's what I mean by positively impulsive, is when you have an impulse that is of a positive nature, do it. Do not let yourself be held back by this. And of course, it is not as simple if you're someone who suffers with anxiety or any form of negative self-introspection, It's not as simple as me just saying, oh, well, just be positively impulsive, you'll be fine. That's why I want you to start, and I recommend that you start with very simple things. Things that are, as I said before, not difficult enough to cause a problem, but different enough to cause an outcome, let's say. Now, with that in mind, I would like to add a thought that I've been thinking about recently as a result of listening to one of Jordan Peterson's podcasts. And essentially, it's this idea that humans are, though we identify ourselves as one person, you are you, I am me, we are like a community of people, in the sense that you are you at one age, you are you in one emotion, you're you when you're happy, you're you when you're sad, you're you when you're 60, you're you when you're 20, you're you at work, you're you with your parents. Every single circumstance that you find yourself in calls on a different version of yourself. And you will notice that the version of you who's standing at work is not the same version of you standing in a group of your friends. It's just a very different person. Fundamentally, it's a different person. And with that in mind, you can start to cut yourself slack where it's required. And you can consider yourself in this community vein. And what this does is it really helps you become compassionate for yourself. And it helps you rationalize the negative thoughts in your head. And what I'm going to get onto here is essentially the idea that is, unfortunately, it's a invariable byproduct of self-improvement, is this constant doubting of yourself and this difficulty to appreciate your efforts. Now, what I'm going to tie this round with is that if you can identify, say we're gonna run with the topic of today's video. Say you're trying to become more openly confident and more true to yourself out in public, you're trying to lose that suffocating feeling of anxiety, it's important to recognise that the version of you who's at home and very confident and comfortable, and the version of you who's out in the big wide world trying to become that, they're very different people, and you have to treat them in that way. When you're angry, you're not you angry. You are a version of you that has only got the perspectives of anger. So often we find ourselves in positions in which we'll think, oh, why did I act like that? I wish I didn't act like that. And we're speaking from a rational, calm perspective. We're not looking at things. Say we burst out at a friend or had an argument with the missus or whatever it is. And we look at things from a rational perspective and wish we did things differently, but don't account for the fact that in that moment, we weren't rational Tom. We weren't rational you. We were irrational, angry version. They're very different people, and you have to look at them that way. And the best thing that you can do with this is provide yourself with the appropriate amount of compassion and consideration to help yourself minimize the gap between, say, the angry version of you and the happy version of you, and come to a kind of conclusion in which the version of you that deals with pretty much all scenarios is a version of you that you're happy to deal with said situation. And this is what Jordan was saying, was essentially this idea that the decisions you make today, you want to look at them with the angle of how many versions of myself can I take care of today? Can I, by meditating today, take care of the angry version of me as well as the happy version of me, as well as the version of me in 10 years' time? Quite possibly. And essentially this is the idea, is trying to take care of as many versions of yourself as you can, and with that, being aware of your efforts to do so. If you're stepping out and doing the whole removing the spotlight effect thing that we're talking about today, if you're doing that, you are helping a serious amount of your community. The amount of people within you that are being helped as a result of this is astronomical, in fact. You're actually giving yourself so many positives across the board, because every version of you is going to become more confident and is going to feel better about themselves, and is going to be able to deal with situations in a more positive fashion, be more rational, all the rest of it. And being able to cut yourself the slack is what I find genuinely important here, because it's so easy when you're improving to refuse to afford yourself any positivity. It's almost as though the more you improve and the better you get towards something, the less positivity you can attach to doing so. When you first start something, we seem to start out, and this is obviously in line with having motivation, and once that zaps, it's not the same thing. But when we start something, we have an understanding of, look at me, I'm doing this thing. When you go to your first martial arts session and you're terrified to do it, you have an understanding of, oh my God, I feel so good about myself. I went and did that even though I was scared. Once you've done it 15 times, you don't have that anymore. And the unfortunate thing is, that means you've done it 14 times between then. You've done that same thing you did at the start 14 times. And now it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't have that same emotion attached to it. And this is the unfortunate part of improvement, is we become accustomed to our success, and we no longer deem ourselves as warranting appreciation for what it is that we do. And having the ability to provide yourself with that appreciation, and at that, what I've just said there, compassion and an understanding of who it is that you are, is really important. And unfortunately, as I say, it's one of probably the most rife issue within the self-improvement industry, is people doing great things and becoming great people and not feeling like it. So with this in mind, I'm going to bring it all round. Going out and doing something like the removing, of dispelling the illusion of the spotlight effect, it doesn't require your constant effort all the time in the way that you think it does. And what I mean by that is we can get so caught up on this idea that we have to be constantly improving towards things. We have to be constantly working towards the goals that we're going for. And we do this to the point in which we demotivate and demoralize ourselves because we just can't keep up with this insatiable hunger and this standard that is just unrealistic. It's not capable. It's not possible. And, you know, we'll find ourselves in positions in which we're working towards a goal, and we might go one day where, do you know what, actually, this is really hard for me today and I'm struggling beyond the point. Or an example I'm going to call on here is trying to compliment strangers. Complimenting strangers is a very difficult thing, and you might find yourself in a position in which you've been complimenting someone every day, and then you walk past someone and you get that voice that says compliment them, and you're going to, and just as you do it, they look away. And you don't do it then because it feels kind of awkward to do so. And unfortunately, this is the sort of circumstance that will cause serious negative contemplation and negativity towards your goals. And unfortunately, there is a real difficulty becoming rational when it comes to improvement, because we get so set on this idea of improving that we don't hold ourselves to a humanistic standard anymore. It's almost like we become an alien smoking a joint with his middle finger up. We become this version of ourselves that cannot keep up with the expectation that we have. So I do want to make a point of this to say that when you're working towards something and when you're really trying to improve yourself, that you don't have to win every single day. You don't have to do anything towards the goal every single day. And this is not going to sound popular, but just let me work through this. Is you see so many things on the internet that are one of two. They're either a more compassionate view that any work towards the goal is good, and you get the Goggins sort of view, as much as I love him, of you have to do exactly what it was you said you do, and there is no room for error. And both of these, I think, miss a fundamental essence of human nature, and that's that sometimes we can't do anything. Sometimes it becomes so difficult to do things that we do need to just not do that. We need to pivot, and we need to do something else today. And we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to look at ourselves in a different light. So if you're someone who is working towards a goal, like a social goal in particular, is really has this potency to it because it's so draining, is if you're finding yourself working towards a goal and there comes a day where you, different to just feeling tired of doing things and working towards things, when you're feeling genuinely burnt out and like you can't seem to keep up with things anymore, when you get to that stage, cut yourself this slack and recognize the fact that there are different versions of you that show up for different days. And sometimes the version of you that shows up today is the version of you who has been working relentlessly and is tired and needs some time. It's at points like this where it's important to genuinely take care of yourself and really put yourself first. And unfortunately, it's not the most popular of advice, and I understand why it's not, because it can be abused. But Mike Israetel said something that was fantastic on this point, and that was that we can get into a kind of, and I'm going to coin a term from Chris Williamson, productivity purgatory, in which everything we do is for the intensive purpose of productivity. And with that, this can extend to even our rest, and we'll find ourselves in positions in which we need to rest, be it physically or mentally, and the thing that we really want to do is pretty much the complete opposition of what it is that we have been doing, and because of that we choose to do something that's more in line with our ideas. So for instance, you might be very mentally drained and you really just need to switch the brain off, and rather than what your brain is telling you it would like to do, which is just sit and watch a series on Netflix for a few hours and just really just chill out and do nothing, you'll meditate and journal because it's in line with your goals. That's fine. You can do that, and I condone both behaviours. I think both of them are fantastic for us, and at that, things I really think you should implement. But if your method of relaxation is something that doesn't genuinely relax you, and it's actually more just a method of work, then you're not relaxing. And at that, you're just going to burn yourself out even more because you haven't actually relaxed the way you wanted to. It's great to meditate, and if you find genuinely that meditation is something that actually relaxes you and actually affords you that luxury of relaxation, then great, that's fine. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that just because something is bad when it's used in excess, that it's bad when it's used proactively, let's say. If you're working hard towards something and your brain says, I really need some time off, can we just sit and watch TV for a bit? Don't feel bad about that. It's okay to do that. And the unfortunate thing that can come with this, and it's another thing that comes along with the negative self-talk and the inner tyrant in the head of those that choose to improve, is that we seem to get this impending doom sort of feeling when we do anything that's not in line with our goals. It's almost as though you could have been someone who's been improving for years and been working towards things for years, and if you sit and watch TV with a tub of ice cream for 2 hours, you feel almost as though you've reverted back to that version of yourself that you loathed so much. And you have this kind of catastrophizing and end of world feeling in which you feel like all the work you've done is for nothing, and you feel as though I'm not that person that I want to be when I do that, and you feel guilty for it. And I do want to shine some light on the fact that it's okay to do things that aren't intensively productive. It's okay to do things that are just things you want to do. It's important to remember that the idea of self-improvement is to be able to afford yourself the luxury of happiness, or at least ability, in every circumstance. It's being able to sit with your thoughts whilst you watch TV with a tub of ice cream and not feel guilty about it because you're aware that you're in control. And this is the unfortunate part of self-improvement, is it does condone these unrealistic perspectives and expectations of yourself that almost remove the ability to actually enjoy the things that you want to enjoy. If you're someone who likes playing a game, it's not in line with your goals to be on the PlayStation, so you're not going to do it, even though sometimes you just fancy a little game on the console. What I'm trying to say here is being compassionate towards yourself and affording yourself some luxuries that are for no purpose besides just because you want to is really important. And I think there's a lot of time for this that people don't give. I think you need to learn to be able to incorporate what it is you genuinely enjoy at your heart and know how this impacts you. And what I want to round out here is, it seems as though, and I touched on this before, the more that we improve, the worse we can feel about ourselves. We hold ourselves to this standard that's so unrealistic that what was once a grand achievement and something really to write home about now becomes a failure. If you were someone who couldn't do 20 push-ups and now you can do 30, doing 20 doesn't mean anything anymore. But at one point, when you could only do 10, it was massive. It was a fantastic achievement. And of course, as you grow, your expectations and your standards of yourself have to go with that. But recognizing where it is that you've come from And recognizing the work it is that you've done is critical. It's so easy to fall into these patterns in which we don't afford ourselves any luxuries, we don't afford ourselves any credit, and we don't afford ourselves any kindness because we're so focused on working towards our goals. And if we're not careful, we can get into these scenarios in which we catastrophize to the point in which we feel as though the work we have done is lost. And it's at times like this where you have to take a larger scale perspective of things. You have to look at things on a scale of, I understand that, I have to improve every day, but let me look at who I was 2 years ago and let me look at who I am now. And being aware of that it's important. I really think it's important. I'm going to leave it at that today. I appreciate anyone who's got this far. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that I've given you something. You have given me something by being here. Have a good day.